First of all, I would like to share how I actually use Obsidian and what Obsidian is. In fact, Obsidian is a note-taking app, but the advantage of this app is that it allows you to connect notes using WikiLink's syntax. So the syntax looks like this. It's double brackets. So you can kind of create links. And then let's say if you want to later see what other notes a certain concept is connected to, you can click on that concept, and then you have the linked mention and also sometimes unlinked mentions where you can see what was actually the context where the note was used. So it's pretty good because it allows you to connect ideas together. And another advantage is that it works on your local file storage. So in the end, you own your own data, you always have access to them, and they're always on your hard drive. So that means you can port it easily between applications. You can use also other apps. For example, I like using it with Windsurf AI, which is a development tool for software development, but actually it works amazingly well for Obsidian Vaults. In fact, I kind of started using this instead of Obsidian. I'm going to make another video later on how I use this as well. But for now, we'll focus on Obsidian. And InfraNodus, which is a tool that I created, is a text analysis tool that visualizes ideas as a network. It shows you what are the main clusters of ideas, so they're usually indicated with the same color, how they relate to one another, and also what are the gaps between them. So you can always see kind of like the general visual overview of the ideas and how they're connected, so you can see them in context, which is very important. It's not just a tech cloud, but it's an interconnected entity you're looking at, which already kind of motivates you to think in terms of relationships. And you can see that, for example, in the context of this node, I'm using medium perturbations in the same context as electrical currents. You would never see it with just a standard text analysis. So it's kind of really well suited for the natural pattern recognition that we as humans have. We're very good in recognizing patterns, and this is why graphs are so good in visualizing information. And then most importantly, it shows you the gaps between different clusters that it identifies. So you can see, for example, that there is two clusters like here, light variability and language resonance, which are not connected. And usually it's going to be very unlikely topics. You know, what would be the connection between light variability and language resonance? Very strange, but this is exactly where the new ideas lie, because I was talking about this text in the context of this node. So I mentioned those ideas in the same context, but I didn't link them together. And this is what InfraNodus is very good for. It shows me what are the topical clusters that I talked about, but I didn't yet link in the context of a particular document. And then it proposes me to think of a connection between them. And then you have several layers of difficulty sort of that you can get into. So if you like to think for yourself, you would just look at the clusters. You can also click this button here that shows what are the concepts inside those clusters and kind of think a little bit what could be the connection between them. So there's one on the medium and electromagnetic radiation, and another one on listening devices and how it's connected to language, and how we can also think of a language as a sort of antenna. I was writing about antennas here, right? So then I can think, okay, what could be the connection between those two topics? If I know them well, it's going to be easier for me to think about them. If not, it's going to be more difficult, but the effort is really worth it, because usually you will have this kind of eureka moments when you come up with something that you haven't thought of before. So that's why it would be really interesting to think in this way. And you can then see in which context these two clusters or these two topics appear in the text. So you can click on the context here, and it's going to show you the two most sort of suitable statements for each topic. So you can then read more about it and think of a connection. Here I'm talking about an analogy of antennas and language, and how there is some sort of like if I write a text, it's like a device to also tune into a certain discourse and to attract people who are interested in the same discourse, right? Like any text or any sort of idea that we put out there can also be seen as a sort of antenna. So I'm kind of like remembering what I was thinking about here. And then it shows me another statement from where I was talking about variability of electric flow and how waves are used to propagate information. So then I can think maybe how can I create waves in language and communication? So it can be a philosophical question or a technical question. And then eventually I can also go into the AI advice and generate a research question based on this gap. So it kind of takes the graph structure, the underlying graph structure, and the statements that it extracted, and then it uses AI to generate a research question, which I kind of like as a first step because it still makes me think of the answer, and it's much better than just generating an idea because I have to go the whole path myself. So how might the variability of electromagnetic wave propagation through space be analogous to the way listening devices attune to combinations of words and language? And what insights could this offer into designing adaptive communication systems? So that can be like a philosophical or a scientific question that I can then use. And eventually, if I like, I can send it to the internal chat, set it to go beyond this context if I want to kind of transcend the context of this node, or I can stay in the context. And then I send a question, and then it will use a built-in RAG system, which is a part of the InfraNodus Obsidian GraphView plugin, and generate an answer with the references to where it actually took the answer from. So that's kind of like a really basic workflow. You visualize the information, have an overview, reveal the main topics, maybe zoom into some specific concepts, and then think of the gaps and generate ideas for those gaps. And eventually I'm going to show you later in the webinar how you can integrate them into your writing. Now I'm just giving an overview of the main ideas. So that's how the InfraNodus GraphView works. And I also want to note that it's very different from the Obsidian GraphView because Obsidian GraphView looks something like this. I will open it now. Like now I can see the whole vault. So it's pretty good as a pretty image to show me what is the kind of like my knowledge universe. You can also use the visualization to see that maybe some clusters are a bit disconnected, so you could connect them better. Like for example here, visualization practice and some article on personal management system. So I can kind of use the same approach as I use when I'm analyzing the InfraNodus graph, but this graph doesn't have any hints. It doesn't guide me through how I could actually play around with it. So people come up with all sorts of elaborate filtering systems where they can filter nodes by a certain tag or type and groups, and then it might become more useful, but still it's kind of hard to use, I find. And another thing is that when you visualize a specific node, for example, using this graph view, let me do this now. For some reason, it doesn't want to visualize the node. Maybe I will switch it to the Okay, it doesn't show me the local graph view, but basically what I wanted to say is that in the local graph view, it only visualizes the wiki links that you tagged. And that's a huge downside for me because sometimes I don't want to link them myself. I don't want to create all those links manually. Sometimes it's very useful because you kind of review the information and you make all those links, and then the graph that you will see is going to be the graph of those links. So let me show you the graph for antennas, the current text, for example. I will find it like this, I think. Antenna. Yeah, so you see here, the graph for antennas that's made with the native Obsidian graph view looks like this. I just see the main file and all the links that I created inside. But what does it give me? I mean, I can navigate using it maybe, but it doesn't really give me an idea of how those links are interconnected. The native Obsidian graph view doesn't show that. Whereas when I visualize this text inside InfraNodus, I have several advantages. First of all, it visualizes both wiki links that are marked here with the double brackets and also single concept. So I can kind of see everything and it's much more specific. Another advantage is that I can also see how those links are interconnected to one another. So if they're used in the same context, obviously there's a relation between them. For example, here antenna and dipole are connected. So that means that you know, there's a link that I can explore here, and there's a cluster of ideas that, for example, medium, I'm using it in the same context as electromagnetic radiation and so on. Signal, I'm using in the same context as the word coil. So I'm seeing much more information here. It's much more specific, and also it's organized into clusters that are shown here. So I get a lot more contextual information about my node, and I don't just see this kind of pretty graph of, just a star of ideas, but I'm actually seeing contextual information here, which is really, really useful. And I can also use InfraNodus to navigate through. So for example, if I want to go to medium perturbation, like I would do here, I would click here and go to that page. But in the same way, I can also do it using the InfraNodus graph. So I can go here and then I click this arrow and then I appear on that page. So that would be kind of how you would use it as well. And the advantage here is that you actually have much more links that you can explore. So I can even go to the pages that don't exist yet, that like structure. And in fact, I can see what else structure is connected to. So I can see that it's connected to network, for instance. So then I can explore, okay, what is the connection between structure and network? I can click here, and then I see that there is some documents I have on network. So this is why it's kind of like really useful, because you can also navigate through the page, but you also have this contextual structural information about the page or the whole folder or the vault. So that's how it works. And these are some differences that InfraNodus GraphView has from Obsidian. Of course, if you would like it to work like Obsidian, you can also go into settings and say that you just want to process wiki links only. And then it's going to only visualize connections between those wiki links. So you can see how these words connect to one another, how those pages connect to one another. But if you want standard view, it's going to show you both wiki links and concepts. So that's the difference of it. If you have any questions, let me know. I will read now one that we received in the Q&A section. So there is a question from an anonymous user. Is the InfraNodus graph generated based on that particular node only, or can it be the entire folder? Yes, it can be entire folder. It can be search results. It can be tags. It can be bookmarks. I'm going to show you later what you can visualize. You can visualize virtually everything. So that's a huge advantage, actually, because no matter how you organize your nodes, you can actually visualize the content inside any sort of view. So yes, you can do it in many different ways. Let me now move on to talk a little bit about how I organize my nodes in Obsidian, because everyone has their way of doing it. And so I just wanted to share mine. Perhaps you will find it useful.